here, what it means to me is that when they had the boycott and they decided that they were not going to ride the buses and they changed the economic game during the 60s, they made an impact. Their voices was heard. And what this means to me this evening in this particular session is that the Dr. Angie experience, I have so many people that's around me that coach me and say to me, girl, you got to get on this social media. And for me, it's like, I don't really want to do that, right? But I have embraced what the times are. I was trying to find me a telephone book so I can have it as an example. Because I like the telephone book. We used to go back to the telephone book and we will look who we want to do business with and we were good to go. But that's not the times anymore, right? And we can't be in a time where we say we want to do things how we want to do it and want to grow, right? But it doesn't mean that we have to conform to what the world says, but we do have to meet people where they are to grow them to where God has called us to help them grow towards. And so with that being said, and this evening, really in this whole weekend, focusing on relationships, we know our behavior is how we communicate, and communication is how we connect. And when we don't communicate in a way where we're connecting, then there's nothing happening between human beings. And for those of us who really believe that we can be in this society or live this life alone, then it saddens my heart because we are designed by God to be in relationships with each other. Whether those are romantic relationships, sisterhood, brotherhood, family, we are designed to be together. And so the premise that we just have the foundation, the common denominator, we love math over here, is that everything, math is important. Math is a love language. And so it brought us together. Yes, it really is. It's a love language. So we know that at the core, the denominator of everything we do, if we have faith, if you have family, if you have friendship, if your health, if your fitness is together, right, and your finances, you whole. When those things are out of order, we find ourselves to be a little annoyed and agitated in life, right? And none of those areas are always going to be equivalent to each other. And one thing in mathematics is that we want to try to have this balance. But what we're trying to do is really have harmony in life. And so what we want to take a little time to do is really to have a conversation. I am so grateful for all of the videographers and the photographers here tonight because my dream was like, hey, we're going to have a talk show. So this is my little step out into the social media. Yes. Right. And so what we're going to talk about is we're going to think about us being like on a patio. We're going to have some real conversations. And we do want you to ask us questions as well. So we have a hot mic over here. So when you step to that mic, you can ask us a question. Soda, you got a little practice this evening over there in the room, right? So asking questions. But what we do want to do is to say, how do we support each other in business? How do we grow us in this community? And right now, when you watch the news, and I get the opportunity for the last 8 weeks to watch the news constantly, and I like to give myself only like maybe 70 to 120 minutes of news a day. And I also would say, I'm not going to watch the news right now, right? Because I'm okay getting the highlights of the news. But if we don't pay attention to what's going on in society right now, what we call freedom, it might not be freedom for us, right? And some of us feel like our ancestors built this country and we're not going anywhere, right? We have that statement. Some of us have our passports and we're ready to go. But no matter what position we are in, we need to start having conversations that help us grow as a community. And so that's what we want to talk about a little bit tonight. So once again, if you don't know who I am, I'm Dr. Angela Scott, and that's an honor to call myself that, right? I've worked really hard to study for that. And I did take a moment to say, does that really mean anything? So it just means that I took the time to discipline myself to study a little beyond the average, right? The norm. But it doesn't mean anything if you just to say Dr. Angela Scott. It's credentials, yes, but what matters is what you intentionally do with the knowledge that you have. And so one of the things I do believe in is that we should be reading, right? Read what you love, but we got to get back to reading, and we got to get back to understanding vocabulary and what words mean to us. Because we watch the news, we do things in society, and it's just like, and we just let it get away with it, right? And so I don't want us to do that. So hopefully this conversation this evening can take us a little deeper into how we can grow as a community. So I'm going to have each of us go ahead on and introduce ourselves.
Eric Scott. Stanislaus Pullen.
Faith Pullen.
And so as I did that, so one of the things I am going to ask the Pullens, they're very close to us in friendship, and we have a couple group, and so we always say to couples, there's 4 different couples, we get together and we have different conversations, and so they're the Washingtons, the Pullens, the Cannons, the Scotts, in this friendship relationship that we have. And a few years ago, I don't know how many years ago, but we got together and we did this book study on Think and Grow Rich, right? One of the things I have learned about that book, Think and Grow Rich, do you know Napoleon was not rich, everybody? Do y'all know that? Talk back to me. Did y'all know he wasn't rich? Hello? I know he's tired. Did y'all know he wasn't rich? Yeah, I learned he was not rich. Napoleon, the writer of Think and Grow, the author of the book, Think and Grow Rich, he was not rich, right? So one of the things that we did as a friendship group is that we studied this book, but for me, what I realized is sometimes we're reading information of people who are not doing the work. Right? And so we admire, and that's what social media does for us. We look at things and we get excited about it, and we want to follow it, or we look at it and we think we should be doing different or doing more in life. But these individuals, they're not doing it themselves. So for me, I would like to say to the Pullens, how do we just, really, whether it's in entrepreneurship, small business, how do we walk through this life and really do what God has called us and purposed us for in our own authentic voice? How do you two do that?
So, great question. Someone who we listen to, who we admire in the entertainment space always says, don't say I asked a great question. Of course I'm going to ask a great question. That's what I do, right? So Angela asks great questions. So how do we walk authentically in what God has called us to do? For me, I say the first thing is to recognize that God has called you to do something, right? You have to know, like one of my favorite scriptures is, a man purposes in his heart the way that he should choose, but God directs your path, right? So understanding that there is a path that God has for you, and there is a calling that God has for you. So that's the first part for me. And then I think that the living part, and this is something for Stan and I, Stan, I don't know if you want to add to this, but you just have to be authentic. Like you have to be authentic to who God created you to be. You mentioned social media, which I love, and we all harass Angela about being on social media, but social media isn't always reality, right? So you have to understand that you have to move authentically in what it is that God has placed inside of you. And that might look different than somebody else, but it's okay because it's authentic to who you are and what God called you to do, not copying someone else or trying to be somebody else. And I believe that's where you find success.
And I would also like to say, in addition to that, finding what your real purpose is. A lot of times we walk through life not knowing who we are and what our real purposes are. So I think once you and your partner get together, you have those conversations, and then what you try to do with those conversations, like for instance, my wife and I, she and I have a consulting business, it's her passion. However, if I'm gonna be a partner, I'm gonna be navigating with her. So what I did, I listened to her passion, her purpose, and I went ahead and did the legwork. So I went ahead and created the business. I created the LLC for her and everything. So she has that. So if she needs my assistance, I will be there for her. So that's how you navigate that, and that's how you learn, and that's how you grow it together as a couple.
I got to answer the same question. I thought it was going to be a different question.
I'm gonna give you a different question.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna give Mr. Scott a different question. You know, as Stan said, as you begin to hear and listen to your mate, your friendships, and you listen to, and we keep saying the word purpose. But here's a question for the audience and for Mr. Scott. When you feel like you're being led by God, and you feel like you're walking in your purpose, but things become very difficult, how do we know the difference between red flags and when God just say, this is a hurdle? Because the red flags mean God wants us to stop. Don't go that path. That might not be the direction we're going. But a hurdle means like, oh, we're going to hustle for it, but you're going to jump over those hurdles to get to where your destination is. How would you navigate through that?
Yeah, I want the first question. So, some of you know me. I'm, comfortable but not comfortable as far as speaking, and also trying to come out my comfort zone as far as having these conversations. So, actually, when you ask that question, it is a difficult question. Sometimes being on the path as long as I have, as far as trying to listen to God's voice and recognize those signs. I can remember back when I was 10 years old, and it was a small thing, but I was like, dang, this TV almost fell on my head. I just thought about it, and it made me tear up. I was 10, and just thinking like, wow, I believe God saved me from that television falling on my head. So part of it, I believe, is, listening to those signs. We often talk about reading the word. That's how God speaks to you. Praying to God, of course, that's, you talking to God and building that relationship, but also listening to the word that come back to you. You have to listen for those signs. So it is a difficult thing. It's very, very difficult. However, I believe as we listen to those signs, I believe that kind of guides us. Another thing that I try to focus on as far as the obstacles is how much will it hurt if I continue to move forward with a situation or something that I believe is purpose for my life or for our life or my family or, just so on and so forth. So if I believe that it's not going to hurt, but it's going to hurt, but it's not going to be something that costs me too much, I believe God is still saying, no, I want you to go in that direction. But something that's going to cost a lot, you got to stop. And it kind of goes into some of the conversations that we have had over the last couple of months when making decisions about families or, this business or even my pursuit as far as education. Some of the situations that we find ourselves in and being able to move forward is kind of, to me, is kind of the answer. So that's what I kind of look for, when it comes to listening to God's word. And then sometimes it's really just putting down those vices that we have, whether it's social media, whether it's listening to music in the morning. When we talk about traffic, for example, going to work takes me about 45 minutes. I used to listen to the radio and, I want to hear not necessarily the gossip, but yeah, I'm going to listen to the gossip. So the ratchetness and all that kind of stuff. But then one day I just kind of got to the point, you know what? I need to hear more of God's word. Or I just need to be silent and just kind of be in my thoughts. But as I did that, it actually opened up my mind and my heart to hearing and feeling like, you know what, God is right here guiding me through this as far as whatever this journey is, because there's some newness. There's been newness in our life every single year, but going through these last couple of years with Eric and our son and our daughter, Eric and Ada, moving out the house, it kind of put me in a space like, what is next? What is next? And not being able to hear that, or get that answer was difficult for a while. But as I got to the silent points, especially moving into Greco, having to travel, turning down the radio and listening to God's word, whether it's through the app or just through prayer and having different conversations. And even I'm one of those individuals when we talk about being in church. I'm one of those males that'll just stump his feet. I'm not, up and down as far as praising, but I found myself listening to songs of praise and just tears would come to my eyes, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm about to crash this car. But also feeling like God is going to guide me through these tears, right? I can see through my tears. But anyway, those were my moments of praise and worship as far as, really building that, that focus on what God is telling me. So when it comes to the purpose that God has, I feel in those moments, that's where we hear him. And it's almost like, yeah, this is an obstacle because you got the chance to jump over it because you can look behind you and say, oh, okay, I made it over. And then, wait a minute, there's still another obstacle. So it's like obstacle after obstacle. You know what, maybe I do need to stop. And even with some of the things that we've done, it's like, you know what, let's just stop and regroup and see what's going to happen from here. So it's just a matter of listening, and it's difficult, though. It's very difficult to listen to your heart's mind and to your brain and listening to God's word and knowing that God is speaking to you. Part of that is also having conversations with close people, whether it's friends and family, whether it's prayer warriors, having conversations with aunts and uncles and mommies that I call mommies that maybe didn't birth me, but just having those conversations and recognizing that they have a connection with God, I guess you would say, and recognizing that that word that they just spoke to me is going to help me go forward. But it is a difficult thing when it comes to knowing what's an obstacle. But just keep moving forward is what I, continue to say.
And I would like to extend that. You knew she had something to say. Listen, as he was speaking, I was like, they trying to call him to be a pastor. No, I'm just, I am not your first lady. So with that, I do want to ask the audience, that is a difficult conversation, and that has come up quite a bit in our circle. Like, when do God say to us, like, when do you really feel it in your spirit? And we're talking about entrepreneurship, but we're talking about decision making. Sometimes you get a clear stop sign from God, and we just push forward, right? And that's a stop. But then sometimes things is just challenging for us. That don't mean we should stop that path. It just means those are hurdles. And so that has been a conversation for me, and just in my friend circles and just talking to different people, that like sometimes I'm like, I think this is not the path I should go on. And so have any of you had that example in your life? And then if so, go to the mic. We want to hear from you. Yes, please. Let the social media people hear you. Come on, Angel.
So, definitely have been there, done that. I've been an entrepreneur since 2010 and full time, almost 10 years. And when I was a teacher, I was telling everybody, I'm doing this life coaching. I did it for 6 years on the side. And people would say, when you going to quit? Step out on faith. And I said, there's a difference between stepping out on faith and stepping out on foolishness. I got 4 kids. I need to be prepared because when I leave, I don't want to come back. And thank God it's been almost 10 years full time. But what I have learned throughout this journey, because entrepreneurship is not sexy, like you said, it is hard. There has been years where I've made a lot of money, 6 figures, whoop, whoop. Yeah. And then the very next year it's like, oh man, I should have did a little better with that. Held on to it. And so I've learned that it's very up and down, very unpredictable, but I love what I do. And so in prayer and through meditation and journaling and just using my tools to figure things out when it gets difficult, I'm just constantly reminded, for me personally, this is just my personal journey, I have not yet heard God say stop. It has been pivot, adjust, think of different ways to do things. And so my little thing that I do for myself and with my clients is just, is it ego or is it effective? So whenever I get to these points where maybe I'm not making as much money or things aren't selling or I'm not sure what my next step is it ego or is it effective? If what I'm doing is still effective, it's still making a difference, it's making an impact, it's making some money. So my measuring stick always is when I was teaching, I was making 50. So as long as I'm making 50 or more, I'm all right. And so it's like, if what I'm doing, I'm still effective, I'm still able to provide for my family, I'm still making a difference, I'm still in my purpose, then I'm going to continue to keep going. When I find that I'm not being as effective, is because I'm teetering over into the ego side. You know, what are people going to think if I have to stop, if I have to go back? You know, if I put this thing on sale, if I put this out there and nobody buys or shows up. And so we can get in our ego a lot as entrepreneurs, and I have been guilty of that. And it's something that I work through every year, because there's always some reason why I want to jump in my ego, and I have something to prove to myself. And so I'm just always being mindful of, am I being effective? As long as I'm being effective, I'm going to keep going. Another thing that I've learned through this journey is being disobedient. There's a lot of fear that comes up as an entrepreneur. And a lot of times there's just certain things I don't want to do because I just don't want to. I'm like, that ain't my thing. But what I found is, and I specifically remember, it was 2017 and nothing was working. Like, I don't know if anybody been there. Nothing was working. Everything was working prior, then it just came to a season where nothing was working. I'm like, man, what am I going to do? I had to borrow money from my mom. My dad's like, when you going back to teaching? And I'm like, is this it? And then I was in prayer, and it was like God just said, do what I told you to do. Just do what I told you to do. And in 2017, I wrote my book, because that was one thing that I was putting off. I wrote the book. I held my first women's conference. I held my first June is the new January, this annual masterclass I've done now for 9 years. That was just a year where it was like, do all the things that God has given you, the vision, walk with it, and do what I've told you to do. And I've been okay since. So being obedient and being effective are just two things that I'm really focused on.
Snap it up. Thank you. Thank you, Angel. Yes. Yes. But did you hear what Angel said? She said, is this an adjustment? Do I need to pivot? Right? And so sometimes when we going through decision making, we kind of just limit ourselves into some of the conversations we might have with our families, the way we were brought up, our mentors, everything. But when we get an opportunity to connect with individuals, connect with different people, explore ourselves to things that make us feel a little uncomfortable, it expands our knowledge. And then we see that there's different opportunities out there for us. So it's important that we really understand that when you feel like you're just stuck in certain places, do something that's uncomfortable to stretch yourself, and so that you can see that you can have other opportunities in this life when it comes to decision making. That we're speaking about entrepreneurship and small businesses, but we also work for organizations and companies as well. And sometimes we just don't apply for that position, right? Sometimes I hear people say, well, I don't have the qualifications for that position, right? Well, we can see right now in society that sometimes qualifications don't really mean anything. If you want the job, just go for it, right? So, hey, right? Now, I would love for us to have the qualifications if you're going to be my doctor, if you're going to do any surgery on me or anything like that. And not to make light of that, but sometimes years ago, Eric and I, we had a friend of ours, and truly a friend in that space in our life. He said to us, in your community, y'all apply for where you are for things. He said, we apply for where we want to be. That's a mouthful. And let me tell you, I heard that over a decade ago. No, it's longer than that. And I'm going to tell you, for 20 years ago, and I'm going to tell you, I was still applying where I'm at. I always say I can take my resume and just change my race on it, and I will probably be the superintendent of Hillsborough County Public Schools. That's the qualifications that I have. But we have to believe and walk in that space as well. But here's the thing. We have to do that as a community. You have to know that you have people that's not going to throw darts at you, that they're going to be there to support you. So here's a question for the panel. How do we as a community, whether in business, entrepreneurship, in companies, organizations, how do we begin we deal with, we don't show up right. We're late for things. We don't open our business on time. Working for a black woman as a leader, she can have an attitude. Black men don't support black women in businesses. A lot of different statements are said, and when we feed into that conversation, we don't support each other. How do we grow? So how do we support each other in business, in the workforce, and also in society?
So I think, oh wow, there's a mouthful to be said about that. I think that one of the things that we have to do is we have to do what we say we're going to do. Your word really is your bond. Now, sometimes things happen and you're not able to maybe execute something, but you have to do what you say you're going to do. And we have to look at things from a spirit of helping. When we're talking about entrepreneurship, Stan said something, and it's funny because I was thinking, you know what, I think that this is something I will address on the panel. Consulting is I love strategy, right? I love strategy, and I love consulting, and I've done it, but not formalized it. And Stan, although he is my husband, but Stan has a passion for helping people. He did the legwork for me to make sure that all the stuff that I was doing, that I actually had it, formalized in the way that it should be. And I think that sometimes it's coming alongside the people that we say that we're there to support, finding out what they need, not what we think they need, but what we know that what they tell us that they need, and then doing those things for them. That's one way. And then I say this often, but it goes back to being authentic, because you talked about the workplace as well outside of entrepreneurship. Black women can be difficult. I'm a black leader, and I've been a black leader for a long time. Angela and I got some stories together, but I show up in the room and people are like, oh, you're so professional. What does that mean? What did you want me to be? But you just have to show up and be authentic. And then you let God kind of guide you. You let God guide you for how do you want me to show up. And sometimes you have to silence those voices inside of your own head and just be authentically who He's called you to be. But when it comes to supporting one another, the premise of your question, we have to do what we say we're going to do and listen to people for what they actually need, and then execute and do those things for them when and where you can. So, yeah.
I concur with that. So, I used to be in sales. I sold cars for over 10 years. So, when I think of that, as far as networking, and anytime you do networking, right, it's not always going to benefit you. So the key at networking is collaborating. So say, for instance, I know Dr. Scott does what she does, okay? And then I meet someone else, and they may have some similar passions. So what you do, you bring those people together, and then you try to allow them to build upon that. So I think a lot of times when we don't see self-interest, where it's not benefiting us, we don't like to do the network because we want something out of the deal too. But when you helping people to build and they get here, if they're authentic, going back with those words right there, they will basically bring you with them. Now, if you don't believe me, look at the news. Pam Bundy here right now because of her network with soon-to-be President Trump. She's about to get a higher level office because of what she did. So you have to look at things from not what it's going to do for me, but how can it benefit someone else? And that time for you will come. So I think that those things right there are very important because you're not going to close every deal. It's not going to happen. They say, it's been years ago, but I know in sales, they say the best closer only closed 25%. So out of 100%, you striking out 75% of the time. But as I always tell Dr. Scott, you only need that one. That one deal will change your whole lifestyle. And that's the key right there. So we can come together as a group of people and we put our business ideas together and we start networking with one another and we know different people in different areas. That's how we can grow. That's how you grow your human capital.
All right. So communication is how we connect to people, but our behavior is communication. Have you ever been talking to someone, you went into a business, or you just talking to your girlfriend, and the way she tilted her head, like I'm moving my head now, the way they move their body, it's a way of communicating, right? And so if we know our behavior is communication and communication is connecting, remember, people only understand how to connect to you on the way they know how to communicate, right? And so sometimes we miss communications. We don't connect to each other because we just don't understand the other person's communication style. And so that becomes a problem when we're trying to have these relationships. So throughout the weekend, at this Get Your Ship relationship conference, we have different sessions on how individuals are going to help you understand how we communicate. Some of us already know that. I had a funny conversation with my mother. I was talking about self-awareness, and she was like, I'm self-aware. And if you know my mom, you know how she said that, right? She's self-aware, right? And so let me do a kind of like raise your hands in a room. How many of you believe you know yourself? Like you really know yourself? Raise your hand. No, raise them high. If you, all right, you feel like you know yourself. Well, let me tell you, this is over the data in the room, right? And maybe because you're here and Get Your Ships Together, and some of you came last year, you do know yourself. But the data shows from Harvard University, really, it's only between 8 to 12% of individuals in society who really are self-aware. If we went to the mall, people would do the same. They'll raise their hand, and they'll believe, like, I know myself. But they're really not in touch with their emotions, how they feel, how they communicate, how people see them, because things are hidden to us and how we're saying things and how we're communicating. And with that being said, so right now I'm going to ask the audience, really, what is our biggest challenge that we have in our relationships? What is your biggest challenge? Okay. Okay. Communication. So communication is our biggest struggle. And this weekend we have multiple sessions on communication. How we can communicate with each other better. Who thinks, let's say if I'm communicating with you, and I love to talk, right? Or whatever it is I love to do. Let's just say if I'm talking to Stan and he does not love to talk like that, all is too many words. Do you think when I'm speaking to him, do you think he's connecting to me? No. Talking, he's not. So should I communicate how Stan understands, or should I communicate how I understand? The way Stan understands. I understand. So with that being said, remember, I'm looking forward to everybody in this audience and enjoying the rest of the things, the rest of the activities we have this weekend. I want to thank the Pullins for this conversation. Mm-hmm. Yes. And we have somebody that's going to come to the mic. Go ahead, Kevin.
I just think everything is really good in what you're talking about in terms of communicating and connecting. And one of the things that really drove me to mastering personality temperaments is because it encompasses everything that you talk about. When I understand how I'm wired, I understand when I'm in esteem, out of esteem, what I need to be, how to communicate, what my red flares are. But when you understand yourself, you also understand other people, because we're all wired the same, but differently. And so when I'm networking, I know that if I am a logical thinker and somebody I really need to collaborate with is somebody who's really detailed and organized, that's who I'm looking to connect with. Because then that person, I know what they like, how they connect, and you talked about supporting each other and collaborating and putting together. We all don't have the same vision. We all have different gifts, talents, and skills, and we haven't been taught. We've been taught to go get it yourself so you don't have to depend, and we forgot to go from being dependent to independent. This is where we stop. And we haven't learned how to move to be interdependent, which is where the wealth is at.
Yes.
And so that's why I am happy to be here and happy to be able to speak on that. because once you master personality temperaments, you can master a whole lot of things in your life.
Yes. All right. Give it up for her. Yes.